You've probably heard that monogamy is natural, that somewhere in our deep past, one man and one woman found each other, stayed loyal, raised their children, and that was that. That story is comforting. It's also almost certainly wrong, because when scientists started digging, literally, into bones, teeth, and ancient DNA, they found something uncomfortable, something written into our own genetics. Evidence that cheating, secret affairs, and hidden children weren't rare mistakes in our ancient past. They were normal. Today, we're going to walk through what anthropologists, geneticists, and evolutionary biologists have actually found about infidelity in early human societies. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why almost every one of us is, biologically speaking, descended from someone who cheated. Stick around because the last part of this video is the one that changes how you'll think about every modern relationship you've ever had. Let's start with the myth because you can't understand the truth until you understand where the myth came from. For most of the 20th century, anthropologists studied hunter-gatherer societies and often described them the way Western nuclear families looked: one man, one woman, a handful of kids, a hut, a fire. It was an easy story to tell. It matched what researchers already believed marriage was supposed to look like. But there was a problem. Most of the anthropologists doing this early work were outsiders, looking at complex societies through their own cultural lens, and often only interviewing the men. Women's relationships, women's choices, and women's secrets were rarely asked about directly, because in many of these cultures, and in the research culture of the time, that wasn't considered appropriate to ask. So for decades, the monogamous caveman image stuck. It became a cultural default. Books, documentaries, and museum dioramas all reinforced it. A man and a woman standing together outside a cave, one partner, one bond forever. It took genetics to finally break that story apart. Here's where it gets interesting. When geneticists study human Y chromosome DNA, which passes almost unchanged from father to son, they can trace direct paternal lines back thousands of years. And when they compare that to the DNA of entire family trees, they can calculate something called the non-paternity rate, the percentage of children in a family line who were fathered by someone other than the mother's recognized partner. Modern studies of small-scale, non-industrial societies have found non-paternity rates ranging anywhere from under 2% to over 30%, depending on the population and the social structure. That's an enormous range, but even at the low end, it means that in every single generation, a noticeable number of children were the result of an outside relationship, not the official pairing. Now scale that across tens of thousands of years of human history. Even a modest rate of 5 to 10% per generation, repeated over hundreds of generations, means that infidelity wasn't an occasional scandal. It was a consistent, quiet undercurrent running through nearly every ancient community that ever existed. And this isn't just modern behavior projected backward. Researchers have found similar patterns in the DNA of ancient skeletal remains, comparing expected father-child relationships based on burial location and social status against the actual biological relationships revealed by ancient DNA. In several cases, the father buried next to a child wasn't the biological father at all. In other words, the secrets weren't just kept from neighbors. In some cases, they were kept from history itself until DNA cracked them open. Think about what that actually means for a second. Somewhere, thousands of years ago, a woman went through her entire life letting a man believe he was raising his own child. Neighbors believed it. The community believed it. That belief got carried into the historical record, the burial site, the family lineage, the story that got passed down, and it stayed unquestioned for millennia, right up until a lab technician ran a genetic sample and the numbers simply didn't match. That's not just a footnote in a research paper. That's a secret that outlived the person who kept it, outlived their entire community, and only came undone because science finally had a way to ask the question directly. This is where evolutionary biologists get really uncomfortable to listen to, because your body may be quietly built around this. Consider a few things researchers point to. Sperm competition. In species that are strictly monogamous, males typically produce a modest volume of sperm because they don't need to compete with other males for fertilization. Humans, however, produce a comparatively higher volume relative to close monogamous relatives, and some researchers argue this hints at a mating history where sperm sometimes had to compete inside a female body, a sign that multiple partners in short windows of time wasn't unheard of. Concealed ovulation. Unlike many animals, human females don't show obvious, visible signs of fertility. Scientists have proposed multiple theories for why, one being that concealing fertility made it harder for a single partner to guarantee paternity through mate guarding alone, which may have opened space, biologically speaking, for more flexible mating patterns. Emotional wiring. Some researchers in evolutionary psychology argue that both jealousy and attraction to novelty appear to be deeply rooted human traits, not contradictions, but two sides of the same evolutionary coin. Jealousy evolved because infidelity was a real and recurring threat, and it was a real threat because attraction to novelty was also a real and recurring drive. None of this means ancient humans didn't form deep, loyal bonds. Many clearly did, and pair bonding likely helped raise children successfully. But the biological evidence suggests those bonds coexisted generation after generation, with a quieter pattern of outside relationships running underneath them. Once researchers started asking more carefully, and once more female anthropologists began doing fieldwork and speaking directly with women in these communities, the picture changed fast. In several documented hunter-gatherer and small-scale societies, anthropologists identified a belief system sometimes called partible paternity, the idea that a child can biologically have more than one father, with each man who had a relationship with the mother during pregnancy considered a contributing father. In these societies, a woman having relationships with multiple men wasn't hidden shame. It was a recognized and in some cases socially beneficial practice, because it meant multiple men felt a responsibility to help provide for and protect that child. Researchers studying these communities found that children recognized as having multiple fathers sometimes had higher survival rates than children with only one. In a world with disease, famine, and violence, having more than one man invested in your survival wasn't scandalous, it was a strategy. This flips the cheating is purely selfish story on its head. In some ancient contexts, what looks like infidelity from a modern lens may have functioned as a very old, very practical form of insurance. And it wasn't only about survival odds for the child. Anthropologists studying these communities also noted something else. The men involved often didn't see themselves as rivals. In some cases, they described a kind of quiet cooperation, almost a shared responsibility, rather than jealousy or conflict. That doesn't mean there was never tension between them, but it does mean the modern assumption that multiple partners automatically means betrayal, anger, and broken trust wasn't the default reaction everywhere. In some ancient social structures, it was simply how the community made sure a child had more than one adult looking out for them. This is a hard thing for a lot of people to hear, because it challenges something we think of as universal, the idea that jealousy and possessiveness over a partner are just human nature, full stop, in every culture, every time. The evidence suggests it's more complicated than that. Jealousy does appear to be a deep, recurring human emotion, but how strongly it was expressed and what behavior it was attached to seems to have shifted depending on the social structure a group had already built around survival. Now, before this starts sounding like ancient humans had no rules at all, let's be clear. Infidelity wasn't universally accepted, and it definitely wasn't always safe. In many ancient and early historical societies, evidence from legal codes, burial practices, and written records shows that infidelity, particularly by women, could carry serious social or even violent consequences. Some of the earliest written law codes we've ever discovered include specific punishments for adultery, which tells us two things at once. It was happening often enough to need a law, and communities cared enough to try to control it. This tension is the real story. It's not that ancient humans were either loyal or unfaithful. It's that they were caught, generation after generation, between two competing evolutionary pressures: the drive to form secure, resource sharing partnerships, and the drive to hedge biological bets by having genetic diversity in outside relationships. That tension didn't get resolved 10,000 years ago. If the DNA evidence is right, it's still playing out today in your own family tree, whether you know it or not. Here's the piece most people never connect. If non-paternity rates have hovered anywhere between 1% and 10% plus across most of human history, and if that's been true for hundreds of generations, then the odds that every single link in your ancestral chain was biologically accurate back to the way it was socially recorded are incredibly low. Somewhere in your family tree, not maybe, but almost certainly, there is a moment where the man who was believed to be the father wasn't. It might be 5 generations back, it might be 50, but statistically, across enough generations, it becomes close to inevitable. That's not a scandal, that's just math applied to a very old, very human behavior, and it reframes the whole question this video started with. We didn't evolve as a species where cheating was rare and shocking. We evolved as a species where secrecy, loyalty, jealousy, and outside relationships were all present at the same time, pulling against each other, generation after generation, and somehow, out of that mess, modern humans still emerged as one of the most cooperative, family-oriented species on the planet. It's tempting to use ancient behavior to excuse modern behavior. It's just human nature. But that's not really what the evidence supports. What it does support is this: the intense emotions people feel around infidelity today, the jealousy, the heartbreak, the obsession with paternity and loyalty, aren't some modern overreaction. They're old, ancient, possibly older than agriculture itself. Our ancestors weren't dealing with a fundamentally different emotional world than we are. They were dealing with the exact same pulls: attraction, loyalty, jealousy, survival, just without smartphones, DNA tests, or divorce lawyers. In a strange way, that might be the most human thing in this entire video: the fact that a behavior this old, this widespread, and this consequential still makes us feel something when we hear about it. That hasn't changed in 30,000 years, and it probably never will. So, did ancient humans cheat on each other? The evidence says constantly, quietly, and far more than the monogamous caveman myth ever let us believe. But it also says something more complicated: that loyalty, jealousy, and outside relationships weren't opposites in our past. They were partners, tangled together, shaping who survived and who didn't. If this made you rethink something you always assumed was simple, that's exactly the kind of question this channel exists to dig into. Subscribe if you want more videos like this, where we take something everyone assumes they already understand and show you what the actual evidence says. And let me know in the comments, knowing what you know now, does this change how you think about loyalty today? Or does it just prove some things about human nature never really change? See you in the next one.